and we'll hold the roll open on the Assembly side. So 3-0 on the Senate side for the Senate version, holding open the roll on the Assembly side. Page 5 is population estimates.
Aaron Edwards with the Legislative Analyst's Office. The issue before you here is what adjustment to make for the budget for the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation to account for estimated changes in the inmate and parolee population in the budget year. The governor's May revision proposed a net reduction of $108.5 million. The Senate adopted the governor's proposal, whereas the Assembly reduced the budget by an additional $10 million. The Assembly's population adjustment was based on a slight difference between our estimate of the inmate population in 2015-16 and the administration's estimate. Just to help you understand what's driving the difference there, the administration's estimate is based on actual population trends through February, whereas we had the luxury of having a bit more up-to-date data when we did our forecast. So we looked at data through mid-May, and we determined that the actual population of inmates in the prison system was trending below the administration's estimates by about 0.5% or so, and that translates to savings of about $10 million. So we think the administration's population estimate is reasonable, but given that our estimate used more up-to-date data, we would recommend going with the Assembly action on this.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Ms. Bosler.
We would just note that there is significant uncertainty in population estimates, including corrections. The corrections population estimate for the May revision was particularly challenging because there's a lot of new things being implemented, and it's very difficult to understand how those trends will continue. Will they flatten off? Will there be actually a slight uptick? It's difficult to tell. So the two things that are specifically being implemented right now that we have some concern about how the trend will continue are the new second striker parole process that the state is implementing, as well as the Proposition 47 resentencing, as you mentioned earlier. These are new. We don't have a lot of experience. We don't know exactly what the trends will do over the budget year, and so we maintain our May revision estimate as the better estimate given the uncertainty.
Will be Senator Nielsen.
It would be characterized as amusing if it wasn't so serious, but in light of the realignment of some last 3 years, as there was the so-called peace dividend after the Cold War and we were shutting down bases, there was supposed to be a dividend that could be spent on other programs. Well, it seems like CDCR spending with vastly fewer numbers of inmates incarcerated, some 40,000 fewer returning to custody, budgets seem to be not going down. I asked a high official one day, and he said he blamed it all on the federal receiver. I don't happen to go along with that theory.
He's expensive, but he's not that expensive.
I would just also note that our May revision reduced the corrections budget by $130 million over the January estimate. So we did bring our estimate down significantly, and we plan to close 4,000 out-of-state beds in the coming year, and that will be a very large undertaking, closing 2 of the out-of-state facilities that we've been in for many years, and then also reducing other out-of-state capacity that we have.
Thank you. And we were all very pleased to see the $130 million reduction, but in the scheme of more than $10 billion CDC, Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, CDCR, that's not much more than a percentage point. We've reduced our inmate population down to about 128,000 right now, and that came, Mr. Edwards, and that came from 160 or 170?
I believe prior to realignment, the population was around 160 in that range.
Okay, so down at least 32,000, and we can multiply 32,000 by?
Well, that's a bit of a tricky question.
50,000 a good figure to use?
If we take inmates out of the 34 state prisons and closed prisons, you would save about $50,000 or $60,000 on average per inmate. In reality, as the population is declining, what we're actually doing is reducing our use of the contract beds, and those contract beds have an average cost of about $29,000.
Okay, at 50,000, I get a savings of 1.6. So even cut that in half, that's $800 million. And I know that, and does that account for fixed costs, or that's just straight off the top?
Those are, when you're talking about the contract beds, those are just the variable costs.
Right. Yeah. It's more complicated than that, and I know we have a lot of costs that the receiver has put on us with regard to health care that are unavoidable. But as we move forward, I would just like to point out again a savings of $10 million from the department that has grown by $1 billion over the past couple of years is very attractive.
I think we should, and I just want to note, and we'll see this also in the next item in terms of closing one of the facilities. You know, it's a good thing to know that our population is going down. It was very alarming to know how rapidly it grew, our prison population. And it's good to know that we're saving some money, and we're going to try to continue to do that in terms of our prison population so we can put it in things that we can smile about in terms of preschool and schools and things like that. I'm also amazed because it was before my time when I heard about realignment. I thought everything would go to hell in a handbasket, and I'd be very afraid to walk up and down the streets of my neighborhood, and I haven't felt that yet. So I guess we must be doing some good things in terms of supporting those that are coming out.
Thank you. So we will move on to page 6, California Rehabilitation Center closure, as foreshadowed by Assemblywoman Weber. Mr. Edwards.
As you noted, the issue before you is whether or not to close the men's prison known as the California Rehabilitation Center in Norco, California. The Senate adopted trailer bill language that reinstated the intent of the state to close CRC within 6 months following the activation of 3 new infill facilities that are scheduled to be open in February of 2016, whereas the Assembly took no action on this issue. Just by way of background, you may recall that the administration's plan for reorganizing CDCR, known as the Blueprint, originally called for the closure of CRC following the activation of these infill facilities. That plan was later reversed due in part to the court's rejection of another key component of the blueprint, which was to raise the population cap from 137.5% design capacity to 145% of design capacity. We are recommending the Senate action on this issue. The administration's population projections indicate that the department is unlikely to exceed the population cap in the near future, even with the closure of CRC. So the facility is quite dilapidated, and both the department and the receiver have indicated that it would require significant capital outlay investment were it to remain open indefinitely.
Is dilapidated a euphemism? I've heard horror stories.
I've heard a lot of bad things. I haven't personally been there. I know there have been the Department of Public Health recently issued a pretty scathing report on the conditions there. I think there are a lot of concerns with the infrastructure.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Sure. We would also note that closing that facility would likely result in savings to the state. We estimate of about $75 million annually. And it's important to note that closing that facility comes with some trade-off, as you would probably need to maintain a higher level of out-of-state contract beds than you otherwise would if you did close CRC. We think if you compare the cost of those contract beds to the savings that you would likely get from closing CRC, it would be about $75 million annually to the state.
Thank you. So it was agreed upon the closure, as you said, circumstances changed, but then circumstances changed again with the passage of Prop 47. How does that figure into the equation?
It's really sort of a game changer in terms of looking at the population in CDCR. The department's estimating that Prop 47 will reduce the inmate population by 4,600 inmates in 2015-16. And we think that's a reasonable estimate.
4,600, and Norco has a population around 2,400.
Yes, correct.
So
Yes.
this seems assumable. And I want to be sensitive to the state employees who work at this facility, and correct me if some of my numbers are wrong, but I think there are around 200 to 300 officers there.
I believe the proposed number of correctional officers for the budget year is about 600, actually.
About 600, okay, thank you for correcting me. And there are 2 other nearby prisons?
I'm actually not sure which prisons are nearby there.
Yeah, I think it's relatively close to California Institute for Men and California Institute for Women.
Okay, and system-wide, I'm told we have about 6,000 vacancies?
In the correctional officer classification, I think we actually have about 3,000 vacancies as of January.
Way off, okay, 3,000.
But that is a rate, about 13% vacancy rate,
Okay.
so.
Not insignificant.
No.
And there will be 600 new positions with the infill?
I don't know the exact number of positions for the infill.
Right. And you know what would be helpful is, of the 3,000 vacancies system-wide, what the vacancy number is at these 2 other institutions nearby Norco. The point I think I can reach looking at all these numbers is that our concern for the well-being of the state employees who are officers at Norco can easily be met by the need in the system and even in a rather regional approach, so that families aren't uprooted not too significantly. So again, some agreements had been made. We've got a $70 million annual savings. This is a department that we need to be looking at carefully to make sure it's as efficient as possible after such extraordinary expansion and growth. Ms. Bosler, it's your turn.
Yes, we don't support the trailer bill language at this time. However, clearly we've been on record as proposing the closure of CRC in the past. I think our view of this right now is that it's premature. We plan to do a lot of hard work this fall to really look at a long-term plan for our prison system and really take a look at what population we are going to have. As you've noted, Proposition 47 has changed the prison population. There are other actions that the 3-judge panel has also directed the state to implement that are also changing the prison population. And so all of these factors will need to be taken into consideration, as well as the physical plant and condition of our existing system. And we hope to put together a comprehensive plan, and at that time we'd like the opportunity to discuss this issue further. But right now this is premature, and it would be difficult for us to manage with this kind of restriction.
Just curious, I know this conversation will be continued, but could the administration, if not today, within a reasonable amount of time, tell us exactly when we could take action with your comfort level in place? It's just that we've been putting this off for many, many, many years, and the state has so many needs. If we have a way to save $70 million a year and close down a dilapidated, rather unpleasant institution, I think we'd all be the better off.
Yes, you have our commitment that we are working on this fall, and that there would most likely be something reflected in the January budget next year.
Yeah, and, you know, just in terms of our perception as well, you know, as we've listened to our staff, it's very clear that it's in our best interest to close this prison and to try to do it in a manner that obviously phases it down, but surely not to put it on a list of delay. And whether it can occur in 6 months afterwards, but we need to really get on track to make this happen. My understanding from staff that if we don't close this prison, then we're going to be faced with a $1.5 billion worth of repairs for it. That our
I hadn't even mentioned that.
healthcare receiver has said that no matter what we do with all the other challenges we face, if we don't shut this one down, it's going to cost us $1.5 billion to repair a prison that we probably don't need. And so I think to a certain extent this is a major undertaking. So especially if we're talking about a prison that we think we can accommodate the inmates somewhere else in the state, that we're reducing our population. But most importantly, unless we're willing to spend $1.5 billion on this prison, which I don't think any of us are willing to do at this point. You are? No, you want to talk?
No, he wants to.
Okay, I have to say, Mr. Nielsen wants to spend $1.5 billion on a prison that we don't need. I'm going to write this down. But anyway, but no, I just say, I think we need to, our position is we need to really develop in some way, whether it's tradable language or whatever, a much more aggressive plan to basically work to close this down in a manner that's sensitive to, obviously, the prison population and the staffing that's there, and develop a very comprehensive plan to get this done. So we're not left with this receiver that we're under, basically still looking and saying to us, you're going to have to do this $1.5 billion repair, and that's going to happen probably sooner than later. And I think we want to get ahead of the game and get it over with and have a plan that will do that and indicate that to the public.
Thank you, Senator Nielsen.
I will submit, and I think I would have more experience than anyone almost in this room on this particular issue. It's premature to declare victory on realignment. If you look within our communities, and even you look at statistics, certain crime areas are indeed up, like property crimes. And those are a big deal if you are the victim of residential burglary, a real big deal, as well as many other crimes. And in some communities, violent crimes are up. I don't think it's time to declare victory. And closing down Norco, everybody has great ideas of what we're going to spend that money. I submit it was going to be maybe even more costly to put more people out of state or not bring them back. It would be more costly to build a new facility. And do not assume that these numbers are just going to go down because of all of these wonderful new reforms in criminal justice. One of those that's been compromised is justice. Justice to the citizens, justice to victims. Don't declare victory yet, and be cautious about reducing these facilities.
Thank you, Senator. Assemblywoman Melendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go back to some of the data that you put out earlier. You said you anticipated in the year 2015-16 the prison population would decrease by about 4,600. Did I hear that right?
Just solely due to Prop 47.
Right.
The
That's
net
the expectation,
change,
though, right?
Yes,
about 4,600.
Yeah.
Okay, and Norco can hold 2,400 inmates. Yeah. So, what I'm trying to understand is, are we running on the assumption that the 4,600 that those numbers are going to go directly into Norco? That we're going to shift people around, because that's not...
No, that's not really how it works.
Right.
You have to look at the whole system holistically. Right. Yeah.
So, because I understand the concerns about the condition in which this facility is right now, and I've heard similar complaints. I'm just trying to, looking at the numbers, as is everyone here on the dais, and does it pencil out? Does it make sense to close this facility? Will the savings really materialize, or are we going to be chasing our tails and seeing the cost rise because we're, having to find a different home for people out of state, and we're having to find a different place for those correctional personnel who work there? it's not seeming to add up to me.
Assemblywoman, don't overlook that the infill that we're talking about, the 3 different facilities, 3,200 bills, 30%
3,200.
more than what we would lose at Norco, 30% more.
Okay, thank you.
A lot to talk about here.
Yeah, I would just note that as the LAO noted when they presented on this issue, that the closure of CRC would probably require us increasing our contracting bed in the short term because we don't have enough capacity, and we've been working for years to meet the 3-judge panels benchmarks, and we are currently on track to do that, but we would be very concerned about actions that would be taken to jeopardize our ability to meet those benchmarks.
Well, and that goes back a little bit to what I was thinking of that changes the numbers then, right? If we close Norco, then suddenly our percentages change, right? For how many beds are available. So then we have even more difficulty meeting the mandate from the federal
Mr.
judges.
Edwards, can you give us a little finality to the arithmetic here in that I know that Norco's level 2, I think. We have different levels of inmates and different needs, and so all the beds, as you said, it has to be looked at system-wide.
That's right, yeah.
That said, it's about 3,200 additional beds in the infill projects.
That's right.
And
correct.
Are they level 2 or a mix?
Those are level 2 beds.
So we're going to, the suggestion here in the Senate proposal is to close down a dilapidated building that needs $1.5 billion in repair, lose 2,400 beds, as we're opening up 3,200 new beds of the same level in these infills.
And what's the cost for opening up those new beds?
Mr. Edwards?
I don't have the specific figure in front of me.
But those are dollars already
It's
spent.
yes, that's already in the budget. I think it's in the area of $35 million for the budget year, and then it goes up slightly to about $45 million.
Those are dollars already spent, and we're going to save $70 million annually by closing Norco. So there's some logic here. There's some logic.
And I should just clarify that, you know, when we're looking at the numbers, we are looking at the whole system holistically. There's different trends going up and down.
Yeah.
And when we talk about the savings that we're projecting, we think that you could continue the contract bed level that the administration is proposing in 15-16, which is essentially declining to 5,000 beds. You could continue that level into the future and close CRC, and you would still have the capacity to meet the 3-judge panel and have a buffer of a couple thousand beds in the short term. In the longer term, the buffer would shrink and that you would be getting closer to that cap. But in the longer term, you do have some additional options where you could go out and get more contract beds if necessary, or you could alternatively look at options to try to reduce the growth in the prison population. Right. So the longer term is a little bit less of a concern because you do have more flexibility in terms of how you address it. But in the short term, we think we're okay.
Well stated. I've got one more question, then we're going to give Ms. Bosler the last word on this issue, and then we're going to move forward. The repairs. Is $1.5 billion in the right neighborhood of expense?
That's higher than what we would estimate. I think we haven't seen any specific estimate from the receiver.
North of $1 billion.
I think that's probably a little higher than we would think. Most of the prisons that the receiver has provided upgrades to have been in the neighborhood of tens of millions of dollars. That said, CRC is definitely in greater need of improvements, and so it could be higher. Right. But I think over $1 billion would be a little bit unprecedented in terms of what they're doing.
And then lastly, on that point, what's the time frame if we don't close this facility that we're going to have to start pouring, as you say, minimally tens of millions of dollars into it?
I think it's hard to say. I think when the administration initially indicated that CRC needed to be closed by roughly June 2016, at that time it was 2012, as part of the blueprint, they indicated that those capital outlay improvements were going to be necessary in the next several years. And so, you know, I think that puts us there, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now the last word from Finance.
Josh Gauger, Department of Finance. So I think it's important to clarify a couple numbers that have been mentioned.
Please do.
So the infill capacity for first is approximately 2,300 new beds, yes. But assuming 3,200 or 3,400 as the capacity, assumes 137.5 on top of that. And at CRC, when we were talking about 2,400 beds versus 3,200 at infill, it's not counting the 137.5 credit that the department gets.
I get the difference.
At CRC.
Okay.
So those are closer to a wash. It's not an expansion of capacity.
But at least a wash.
It's close. Yes, it's closer to a wash. And
We'll call it a wash.
Also, going back to the blueprint estimates, when it was originally committed to the closure of CRC, so the blueprint assumed that the department would be able to crowd institutions to 145% capacity, whereas now the 3JP order of 137.5 has been upheld. So that's roughly based comparatively to the blueprint of what we assumed we could house in an institution versus what we can now. That's a difference of 2,600 less for the capacity.
And going back to the blueprint, Prop 47 didn't exist at the time, and now that's another 4,700.
Which is an important component of the next piece is that at the time of the blueprint, it was projected for 2015-16 that CDCR's population would be 123,000 inmates. Now, in the spring projections, even when you factor in Prop 47 having an impact of a projected impact of 4,600, they're still projected to have an institution or a total population of 28,000 inmates. So that's another increase of 5,000 inmates compared to when the administration committed to the closure. So that's why we think at this point it's premature. We need to evaluate this over summer and fall and come back with a more comprehensive plan on how to address this going forward, because the out years are a significant concern to us. CDCR is not a nimble system on what you can do with inmates and change capacity and contract for additional beds. So in the out year, CDCR is projecting an increase to its total population of roughly 1,000 inmates per year. So to commit to a closure of CRC when we're only currently about 2,500 inmates below the total capacity, we are planning for 4,000 inmates to be returned from out of state next year. We have the uncertainty of Prop 47. We're projecting at 4,600. We have the second striker parole process at 1,300. So there's a lot of moving targets to commit to a further capacity reduction of 3,400 inmates.
Okay. To sum all this up, so we can move forward, is it accurate for me to say from what I've just heard from you that notwithstanding the blueprint of so many years ago, that the position of the administration at this point is that the closure of Norco is no longer a when, but if?
I think that it's fair to say that it needs to be further evaluated whether or not we can close the facility and still maintain sufficient capacity.
That's what I thought I heard you say. Okay. Page 7. C-post composition. And the Senate had a modified version of the governor's, but shall we hear the governor's first, Ms. Osler?
Sure. We've been working with CCPOA on a 12-week academy for many months now, and we have a proposal to implement that new 12-week academy and also reinstate the correctional officer Peace Officer Training Academy, Correctional Peace Officer Standards and Training, got off there a little bit, which did exist several years ago. This is an important body that management and labor use to bring policy issues to the table about how to run our institutions. And this is something that we have worked closely with our labor partners in coming to a conclusion, and which is a 3-and-3 composition that management and labor in order to reinstate that and move forward.
Thank you. Mr. Edwards.
As Ms. Bosler noted, the administration's proposal was to reconstitute the C-post with 6 members 3 of whom would be representing the Correctional Officers Union, and 3 of whom would be representing management at CDCR, all of whom would be appointed by the administration. The Senate modified that proposal slightly to add a 7th member to the C post, and that member would be a nationally recognized expert on correctional training, and he or she would be appointed by the legislature. We are recommending the Senate version here. We think that it provides greater legislative oversight over correctional officer training and helps to ensure that the training standards in California are consistent with national best practices.
I will just note that when this committee existed before, it was routinely that national best practices would be brought to this committee for discussion, and we intend to continue to do that. Best practices are something that's a part of the CDCR culture, and looking at all of the national reports are something that they routinely do and would continue to do. So we do not support the additional member. We think that the composition makes sense the way we have worked this out.
But in the case of a tie, under your proposal, the tiebreaker is the director of CalHR?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so we're really talking about who's going to be the tiebreaker here. That's the difference between your proposal
So our
and the Senate
proposal does
proposal.
have the tiebreaker being the director of CalHR, somebody that's not as close to the discussions between management and labor. So that is our proposal, yes.
And the Senate's proposal, which I think was recommended by the LAO, has
That's correct, yes.
a different tiebreaker. That's really the difference in the proposals.
Correct.
Your suggestion,
the 7th
which-
member, who would be someone independent of CDCR.
Independent of
the
everybody.
only person on the C post who's
Right.
not a CDCR employee, and someone who ostensibly should be an expert on national best practices
Nationally
would be
recognized expert.
That's right.
So I understand that this shifts, if subtly, control away from the administration. I just wanted to float a different idea by you, Ms. Bosler. What if, rather than appointed by the legislature, appointed by the governor with requirement of Senate approval? That's how confirmations are done. Yeah.
So I think we're really most comfortable with our proposal. There's been a lot of discussion around this for many, many months. And I'm happy to take your suggestion back and talk about it further with our colleagues. But we're most comfortable with our proposal right now.
I'm not surprised. Thank you. All right.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, of course, Senator
Well,
Nielsen.
I am too. I would argue this would only further politicize it, making that one position a very, very highly political pressure position. It's unnecessarily so. I think what's worked for a long time can serve us just fine right now. And this is a very important entity. It does a really important job in maintaining the training, the integrity, and the competence of our employees.
Thank you, Senator. Page 8 is related to California Gang Reduction, Intervention, and Prevention, CalGRIP. And this has an assembly proposal. Hello,
Jessica
Ms.
Peters with the Analyst's Office. The Assembly approved a $5 million general fund augmentation for the California Gang Reduction, Intervention, and Prevention, or CalGRIP program. The Senate did not approve an augmentation. We would just note, to provide some context, the base program is $9.2 million from the restitution fund. And these funds go out to grants to cities, typically through a competitive grant process. And we would just note that while the proposed augmentation may have some merit, you're going to want to weigh this against your other priorities for general fund spending.